right, so this section is 2.8, choosing a good model, and it's really meant to be a practice to get you prepared for your project that you're going to be doing. And what you're going to have to do in your project, the very first thing you're going to have to do is find a set of at least 10 data points. And people will choose things that are interesting to them. I'm not necessarily saying what I chose here was interesting, but here's a set of data that I found. It's how many millions of miles motor vehicles were driven in the U.S. in certain years. So I wrote the numbers this way, but since this is in millions of miles, the actual number of miles, you would take each of these numbers and multiply it by a million. But we're going to use these numbers when we go to enter it into our calculator. All right, and the years I have listed here. The first thing that I'm going to have to do with my data, and you will have to do this in your project, is I'm going to have to put it on a graph. That's called a scatter plot. It's called a scatter plot because it's not necessarily going to form an exact shape. So notice my graph, I have labeled it that on the x-axis I have years after 1900. That's why it's labeled 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. It's not going to be labeled 1920, 1930. It's years after 1900. And my y-axis is miles in millions. And what I've done is every line, if you count with me, is actually worth 100,000 because this is 400,000, it says, which would make this 100, 200, 300, 400. Then we'd have 500, 600, 700, 800. All right, and we keep going. You can not really see that line real well. We can always sketch in the lines we can't see real well. All right, so let's start graphing. 1920 would be 20 on the x-axis, 47,600. If one line up is 100,000, about halfway would be close to 50, which 47,600 is pretty close to 50. 1930, I'm going to go over to 30, and up to 206. So 100, 200, just a little above the 200 would be my 206. Then I'm going to go over to 40. That would be 302, so that's pretty much on the 300,000 line, right there. At 50, I'm going to go to 458, which would be halfway between the 400 and the 500. So I'll put that right there. Then the 1960, I'm going to go up to 700,000 and 18. So not quite halfway, but I've at least got to make sure it looks like it's above that 700,000. All right, then at 1970, I need to make sure I go to the 1 million. So let's see. If this is right here, 800,000, then I'd have 900. That would be a million. That would be 1,000,001. So I'm going to put that right about there. Next one, 1980, is going to be at around 15. So, well, 1,500,000 approximately. So that's the 120, 130, 140, 150, a little bit above. So I'll go to right about there. Just want to show you how I'm going to have to do some approximating here. 1990. All right, so this right up here is my 200. So 144 would be about halfway. So right about there. And then for the 2000, which would be 100 years after, I'm going to have the 2 million. Let's see, that would be 2,400,000. Let's see, 500, 600, there's the 700, and 46 be about halfway. It's almost to 50. So that's my last one. So that's how I'm going to graph my scatter plot. That's one of the things you're going to have to do. Please notice how my graph is very clearly labeled. It is obvious that each line must be 100,000 in order to reach these marks. All right, so next, let's go ahead and look at this next part. We are asked to fill out this table, and you will have to fill out a table like this for your project. So it says years since 1900. That's where I'm going to fill in. That would be my 20, 30. Fill in those numbers. Oops. And then my miles and millions. So I could note that this is in millions, probably in my table. I just couldn't really write it there, would not have fit in that spot. So now I'm going to fill those values in. Okay, so I filled in my miles here. I had accidentally skipped one, so I had to go through and erase and refill them in. But those are my millions of miles. So now I'm going to go to my calculator and enter this data into my calculator. So I've entered my data here, and what I want you to notice is that some of the values don't look the way I typed them in, and that's because it can't fit in this space. If you actually hover over the number, I can't show you here on this calculator, but if on your actual calculator you go to the number, like if you actually click on it, like click on that spot, what we'll have here, I'll click here. If you go down to it, I can actually show you this way. See, it shows me the full number that was typed in, and that's the value that it's actually using, even though it doesn't show it right here. So now we're going to go to Stat and Calc, and we'll go to Linear Regression, and I will calculate my line. All right, and to make this a little easier, let's do all of our rounding to 2 decimal places. All right, so I'm going to write for my linear equation, y equals 32,855.20, x minus 942,264.91. Now, I also want to include my r squared value, which is 0.92. I'm going to go ahead and write down my correlation coefficient, which is r, which would be 0.96. And if you did not get these numbers, that means you typed something in to your table incorrectly. That means you need to go back to Stat and Edit and figure out your mistake, because the rest of your entire table will be incorrect. Even if you now type in this correct equation, you're still going to have, that means you typed an x or a y value in incorrectly. So you want to make sure that you have the exact numbers that I have here before you go any farther. If you don't, go back to Stat and Edit, check your values, then once you make your corrections, go to Stat and Calc, make sure you get this screen of values. All right, so this is what I got for linear regression. Once you've done that, you're going to go back into your calculator and you're going to go to Stat and Calc, and you're going to find your exponential equation, your r squared value, then you're going to go to Stat and Calc, find your quadratic equation, and r squared value, and you'll fill those in here and here. I am not going to do that part with you. I need you to try and do this part on your own. You know how to do that. Again, Stat and Calc, exponential regression, and you'll get your equation. Let's round to 2 decimal places. Stat and Calc, quadratic regression, and you will again round to 2 decimal places for everything. Once you have found these equations, then what you're going to do is you're going to come up here and look at this table. What it wants you to do is it wants you to find the linear predictions, the exponential predictions, and the quadratic predictions. You might want to note that these are all going to be predictions. These are all of my predictions, and I'm going to use my models to do them. So I'm going to show you how to do the linear predictions, and then you will do the exponential and quadratic predictions using the equations that you got on your calculator. So once again, we need to go back to the calculator. All right, So I'm going to go to Stat, and I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to go over to L3. L3 is going to be my linear predictions. So I need to put in my linear equation. I have to be in the top here. I can't be here. I have to be up in the very top. I'm going to type in my equation, which was my 32,000. So you're typing this in right now. And remember, when you get to x, don't type in x. We don't have an x column here. We have an L1 column. So I need to put L1, which is second one. And then I'm going to continue typing in my equation. And I hit enter. I make sure though first before that I haven't typed anything wrong. That's good to know. All right. Then what I'm going to do when I go to type these values in, go to write them in on my table, I'm not going to write E5. If you write E5, I will not give you credit for it. That means you don't understand what this means. This right here is an abbreviation. It means negative 2.9 times 10 to the fifth. That's what that means. The actual number is written right here. So when you go to write it in your table, that's the number you're going to write. You're going to write for that first linear prediction, negative 285,160.91. That's what we're going to write instead of what they have written there. So you're going to go down and you're going to write in each of these again. Whenever you get to one that has an E, don't write the E, write the actual number. Okay? And you'll fill in all of those linear values. Okay, so I started to write what was on my calculator. I did not finish. I'm going to let you finish those linear predictions. Once you're finished, whatever equation you wrote here in exponential, you're going to go back to your calculator and you're going to go to L4 and you're going to write your exponential equation. But remember, when you do that, don't use x. Remember, x is represented by L1. So this column here is my L1. I'm going to actually put it at I'll put it at the top because that's where you're used to seeing it. This is L1. This is L2. This is going to be L3, L4, and L5. And you will fill in all of your predictions that you found, right, using these equations. When you're all finished, which model would you choose and why? You'll have to answer that question.